I thought you were dead. The words never left Adrian Kang's mouth, but they turned his blood cold the second he saw her standing beneath the diamond lights of Laurent and Vale Jewelers on Fifth Avenue. One moment, the Korean Mafia boss had been examining a flawless 12-carat engagement ring while 3 security men stood silently behind him like statues carved from shadow. The next, the ring slipped slightly between his fingers. Not enough to fall. Just enough for the elderly jeweler to notice the tremor in the hands of a man who was famous for never trembling. Rain streaked slowly across the towering glass windows overlooking Manhattan, turning the city outside into a blur of silver and gold. Inside the private showroom, everything smelled of polished marble, expensive perfume, and old money. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above velvet chairs and mirrored counters where diamonds rested beneath glass like tiny captured stars. The entire store had been closed for Adrian's appointment. No customers. No noise. No interruptions. That was how powerful men lived. They purchased silence the same way ordinary people bought coffee. Adrian stood in a tailored black suit so precise it looked sculpted onto him. His silver watch caught the chandelier light every time he moved his hand. At 48, he carried the kind of calm that frightened people more than anger ever could. Politicians shook his hand carefully. Rivals lowered their eyes around him. Even the air near him felt disciplined. Controlled. Cold. But none of that mattered now because Naomi Carter was standing less than 20 feet away arranging a tray of diamond bracelets with quiet, graceful hands. 8 years ago, Adrian had memorized every inch of her face. 8 years ago, her laughter had once filled a tiny apartment above a laundromat in Queens where the radiator hissed all winter long and takeout noodles cost less than $5. Back then, Naomi wore cheap silver earrings and oversized sweaters that smelled faintly of vanilla detergent. Back then, Adrian was not yet the untouchable king sitting at the center of a criminal empire. He was simply a dangerous young man pretending he could still become someone good. Now Naomi wore black silk gloves and a fitted dark dress with elegant sleeves that brushed softly against her wrists. Her hair fell in smooth curls over one shoulder, and her expression remained calm enough to break his chest apart. Because she did not look shocked to see him. She did not look angry. She looked nothing at all. And somehow, that terrified him more than a gun ever had. "Sir," the jeweler asked carefully, forcing a polite smile. "Would you like to see the emerald cut collection as well?" Adrian barely heard him. Naomi finally lifted her eyes for exactly 1 second. Their gazes collided across the glowing showroom. His breathing stopped. Hers never changed. Then she looked away as if he were only another wealthy stranger buying another expensive promise he might never keep. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Adrian Kang understood what fear actually felt like. Adrian forced his fingers to steady themselves before placing the ring carefully back onto the black velvet tray, but the damage had already been done. Marcus Hale, the owner of Laurent and Vale, had spent 30 years serving senators, celebrities, and billionaires, and he had never once seen Adrian Kang lose composure. Not even during federal investigations splashed across television screens. Not even when competitors publicly accused him of crimes no jury could ever prove. Adrian was famous for one thing above all else. Control. Yet now his eyes kept drifting toward Naomi as if the rest of the room had disappeared around her. Soft piano music floated through hidden speakers overhead while rain tapped gently against the towering windows. Somewhere deeper in the showroom an employee uncorked another bottle of champagne, but the sharp sound echoed strangely in Adrian's ears. Naomi continued arranging jewelry displays with quiet precision, her gloved fingers adjusting diamonds beneath warm lights that made every stone glow like frozen fire. She never rushed. Never hesitated. Every movement carried the calm rhythm of a woman who had learned how to survive disappointment without allowing it to harden her soul. Adrian hated how much he remembered. The tiny apartment with peeling paint near Roosevelt Avenue. The late-night coffee from the corner deli. The way Naomi used to sit cross-legged on the kitchen counter reading library books while he pretended not to watch her. Back then, he had still laughed sometimes. The memory struck him with such force that he almost looked away from her entirely. Almost. You have excellent taste, Mr. Kong, Marcus said carefully, sensing the tension without understanding it. This diamond is one of the rarest pieces we have ever acquired. Adrian gave a slow nod, though he had forgotten everything the jeweler said about the ring. Across the room, Naomi quietly picked up a silver tray and turned toward a mirror display case. Her reflection briefly caught in the glass beside his, and the sight nearly stopped his heart. 8 years. 8 years without hearing her voice. 8 years convincing himself that leaving had protected her from the darkness surrounding his life. That was the lie he repeated whenever guilt crept into the empty spaces between business meetings and sleepless nights. He had built an empire large enough to own entire blocks of Manhattan, but somehow the silence she left behind had remained bigger than all of it. Isabella Reed finally entered from the private fitting lounge wearing a cream-colored designer coat draped elegantly over her shoulders. She was beautiful in the polished way magazine covers loved. Tall. Sophisticated. Perfect for photographs beside powerful men. She smiled the second she saw Adrian, but the smile faded almost instantly when she noticed the unusual stiffness in his posture. Adrian, she asked softly. Is everything all right? He answered too quickly. Fine. Naomi's hands paused for half a second at the sound of his voice. Just half a second. Then she continued working as though he meant absolutely nothing to her. Isabella followed Adrian's gaze across the showroom until her eyes landed on Naomi. A strange expression crossed her face. Curiosity first. Then suspicion. Do you know her? She asked. The question settled into the showroom like smoke. Adrian looked directly at Naomi. Naomi did not look back. No, he said quietly. One word. Cold. Controlled. Familiar. But the instant it left his mouth, something inside him twisted painfully because he remembered another rainy night years ago when he had promised Naomi he would never pretend she was invisible. And now he had done exactly that. The lie lingered in the air long after Adrian spoke it. Naomi continued adjusting the diamond bracelets beneath the showroom lights, but something about the stillness in her shoulders changed ever so slightly, as though she had expected those exact words and had already taught herself not to feel them anymore. That hurt him more than anger would have. Isabella stepped closer to Adrian, her cream-colored heels tapping softly against the marble floor while one of the security men discreetly moved farther toward the entrance to give them privacy. Outside, Manhattan traffic crawled through the rain nearly 40 stories below, headlights glowing through the glass like blurred constellations drifting underwater. Inside Laurent and Vale, everything remained polished, elegant, untouchable. Yet Adrian suddenly felt trapped inside the very luxury he had spent years building around himself. You seem distracted tonight, Isabella said gently, studying him with careful eyes. She was not foolish. Women who moved comfortably among billionaires learned quickly how to read silence. Did something happen at the meeting in Seoul? Adrian loosened the cuff of his sleeve slightly. No, another short answer. Another wall. Isabella looked unconvinced, but before she could ask anything else, Marcus approached holding a velvet case lined in dark blue silk. Mr. Kong, he said with a practiced smile, we have another ring I believe may interest you. This one arrived from Antwerp just yesterday. Adrian barely glanced at it. His attention remained fixed on Naomi even when she was not facing him. Every small movement she made dragged old memories to the surface like ghosts rising through dark water. He remembered the tiny diner in Brooklyn where she used to work double shifts after classes. He remembered her falling asleep beside stacks of nursing textbooks while cheap takeout containers crowded the table. Most of all, he remembered the night he disappeared from her life without warning. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence. At the time, Adrian had convinced himself it was mercy. Men around him had already begun climbing toward power through threats, blackmail, and fear, and he knew eventually that world would swallow him completely. Naomi deserved distance from all of it. At least that was what he told himself whenever regret crept in during sleepless nights alone in penthouses too large to feel like homes. Across the showroom, Naomi finally turned toward Marcus. "The sapphire bracelets for the Madison client are ready for pickup," she said softly. Adrian's chest tightened instantly at the sound of her voice. 8 years vanished in a single sentence. Her voice was still low and smooth like warm velvet under candlelight. Calm. Gentle. Entirely unchanged. Marcus nodded politely. "Thank you, Naomi." Isabella noticed the way Adrian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You are certain you do not know her?" she asked quietly. Adrian looked down at the engagement ring resting beneath the glass display. 12 carats. Perfect clarity. Worth more than the apartment where he and Naomi once counted quarters for laundry. Strange, he thought, how diamonds could survive unimaginable pressure and still emerge flawless while people shattered so easily. Before he could answer Isabella, a soft laugh suddenly echoed from somewhere deeper inside the showroom. Small. Bright. Innocent. Adrian's eyes lifted automatically toward the hallway leading to the private offices. A little girl stepped around the corner carrying a paper bag decorated with colorful cartoon stickers. She could not have been older than 8. Her dark curls bounced lightly against the hood of her navy raincoat, and she held the bag carefully with both hands as if protecting treasure. "Mama," she called softly, smiling toward Naomi. The entire world inside Adrian Kang's chest stopped moving. Naomi's expression softened instantly the moment she saw the little girl, and Adrian felt something painful twist deep inside his chest because he had never seen that look before. Not from Naomi. Not for him. The child walked carefully across the marble floor and bright white sneakers damp from the rain outside, completely unaware that every adult in the showroom had fallen silent watching her. "I brought your dinner," she said proudly, lifting the paper bag a little higher. "And Miss Evelyn gave me extra cookies because she said I was patient." Naomi smiled gently as she accepted the bag. "That was very kind of her." The little girl glanced around curiously, then stopped when she noticed Adrian standing near the diamond counter. For a brief second, her large brown eyes met his. Adrian forgot how to breathe. There was something terrifying about seeing pieces of himself staring back from the face of a child. Not only the eyes. It was the way she tilted her head slightly while studying people. The same cautious habit his mother used to complain about when he was young. The same quiet observation. The same stillness before speaking. Isabella noticed Adrian's frozen expression immediately. "Adrian," she asked softly again, but he barely heard her. The child stepped closer to Naomi and tugged lightly on the sleeve of her dress. "Mama, are we almost done?" she asked. "It is getting late." Her voice was warm and sweet, carrying the soft exhaustion of a long school night. Naomi brushed a curl gently away from the girl's forehead. "Almost, sweetheart." Adrian stared at Naomi's hand resting protectively against the little girl's shoulder, and suddenly the expensive showroom around him began to feel strangely unreal. 8 years disappeared all at once. He remembered another rainy evening in Queens when Naomi sat beside him on the fire escape eating dollar store ice cream while telling him she wanted children someday. He had laughed quietly and told her she deserved a better future than the one he could offer. Back then, she had touched his hand and whispered, "Maybe I only want you." The memory landed inside him like broken glass. Marcus cleared his throat politely, trying to ease the tension no one fully understood. "This must be your daughter," he said kindly toward Naomi. "She is adorable." Naomi nodded softly. "This is Lily." Lily gave a shy little wave before hiding partially behind Naomi's arm. Adrian's stomach tightened painfully at the sound of her name. Lily. Simple. Gentle. The kind of name Naomi used to circle in baby books during quiet subway rides home from work. Isabella slowly folded her arms across her coat. Her instincts were sharpening now. She looked from Adrian to Naomi, then to Lily, her polished smile fading another degree. "How old is she?" Isabella asked casually, though the question carried too much weight. Naomi answered without hesitation. She turned 8 in April. Adrian felt the floor beneath him shift. 8 years. The number echoed violently inside his mind. Lily adjusted the strap of her tiny backpack and looked curiously toward the engagement ring still resting beneath the showroom lights. That diamond is pretty, she said innocently. But my mama says expensive things do not always mean something is valuable. The sentence was simple. Childish even. Yet Adrian lowered his eyes immediately because he knew exactly where she had learned those words. Naomi used to say the same thing every time they passed luxury stores they could never afford. Back when he still believed there was time to become someone worthy of loving her openly instead of hiding her in the shadows of his dangerous life. Adrian could not stop staring at the child. Every instinct inside him, every carefully disciplined emotion he had spent years burying beneath tailored suits and cold authority, was beginning to fracture beneath the warm chandelier light of the showroom. Lily leaned quietly against Naomi's side while rain whispered against the windows high above Fifth Avenue, and for the first time in years Adrian Kong felt completely unprepared for the world standing in front of him. Isabella sensed it too. She stepped closer beside Adrian, her perfume sharp and expensive, but there was tension beneath her polished expression now. 8 years old, she repeated carefully, almost as if testing the number aloud. Naomi simply nodded once while folding the handles of the paper dinner bag neatly against her palm. She never looked defensive. Never nervous. That calmness unsettled Adrian more deeply than accusations ever could. Because Naomi was not acting like someone waiting to explain herself. She was acting like someone who no longer needed anything from him at all. Marcus attempted another polite smile, unaware that the emotional air inside the showroom had become dangerously fragile. Lily visits often after school, he said warmly. Everyone here adores her. She usually sits in the back office drawing while her mother finishes appointments. Lily brightened slightly. Miss Evelyn lets me organize ribbon samples sometimes. Naomi gave her daughter a gentle look. Only because you color code them better than the employees. Lily grinned softly, and Adrian's chest tightened again at how familiar that smile felt. Naomi used to smile exactly the same way whenever she teased him during the rare peaceful moments they once shared. He remembered Sunday mornings in their tiny apartment when she danced barefoot across cracked kitchen tiles while old jazz records played from a second-hand speaker. He remembered how she used to laugh at his terrible attempts to cook breakfast. The memories arrived too vividly now, filling every silent space around him until the glittering jewelry store felt unbearably small. Mama says people can survive almost anything if they stay kind, Lily said suddenly while adjusting the sleeve of her raincoat. Even hard things. Adrian lowered his eyes instantly because he knew Naomi had not taught that lesson easily. Isabella studied Lily more carefully now, her expression becoming quieter, sharper. She is very thoughtful for her age, she said politely. Naomi brushed her fingertips gently through Lily's curls. She has had to grow up a little faster than most children. Adrian swallowed slowly. The sentence landed heavier than Naomi intended, or perhaps exactly as heavily as she intended. He could no longer tell. One of the security men approached discreetly beside Adrian. Sir, he murmured quietly, your car will be ready whenever you wish to leave. Adrian did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Lily as she carefully reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small carton of soup with both hands. It is still warm, she told Naomi proudly. I carried it carefully on the subway. Naomi smiled softly. Thank you, sweetheart. Subway. The word hit Adrian harder than it should have. His daughter rode crowded trains through Manhattan while he traveled in armored luxury vehicles surrounded by men who opened doors before he even touched them. His daughter carried soup through rainwater puddles while he stood beneath diamond chandeliers choosing engagement rings worth more than entire neighborhoods. Suddenly the polished showroom no longer looked beautiful to him. It looked hollow. Empty. Like a monument built to distract lonely people from themselves. Lily glanced curiously toward Adrian again. Mama, she whispered softly, not realizing he could still hear her, why does that man look sad? Naomi's face became still for half a second before she answered quietly, some people carry storms inside them for a very long time. The showroom fell strangely quiet after Naomi spoke those words. Some people carry storms inside them for a very long time. The sentence lingered beneath the crystal lights like smoke, soft and elegant on the surface, but heavy enough to settle directly into Adrian's chest. He looked at Naomi carefully then, truly looked at her for the first time since walking into Laurent and Vale. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes now that had not existed 8 years ago. Tiny signs of exhaustion hidden beneath grace and composure. The kind earned through long nights, hard choices, and surviving without help from the person who should have stayed. Yet despite all of it, she still stood with quiet dignity, calm enough to make the entire room feel smaller around her. Isabella finally stepped away from Adrian slightly, though her expression had become unreadable. She was intelligent enough to sense that she was standing inside a conversation no one was speaking aloud. I think I will wait by the lounge, she said softly, smoothing one hand along the sleeve of her coat. Take your time deciding on the ring. Adrian turned toward her automatically, but the words froze before reaching his mouth. For the first time since their engagement discussions began months ago, he realized he did not want Isabella to stay because he no longer knew what future he was pretending to build. Isabella held his gaze for one long second. Something painful and embarrassed flickered quietly across her face before she gave a graceful nod and disappeared toward the private lounge without another word. Adrian watched her go with guilt pressing heavily against his ribs. Isabella deserved honesty. Yet honesty was something he had failed to give every woman who had ever loved him. Lily opened the paper soup container carefully while Naomi checked her phone for the time. You promised we would stop for hot chocolate on the way home, Lily reminded her softly. Naomi smiled faintly. I remember. Even though it is raining? Especially because it is raining. Lily seemed satisfied with that answer and sat quietly in one of the velvet chairs near the display windows, swinging her feet lightly above the marble floor. Adrian could not stop watching her. Every small gesture kept tearing pieces from his carefully controlled world. The way she wrinkled her nose slightly while concentrating. The way she tucked curls behind one ear before opening the soup container. Even the tiny silver chain around her neck looked painfully familiar. His breathing slowed dangerously when he noticed the pendant resting against her sweater. A small silver dragon. Adrian felt his pulse stumble violently. 8 years ago, he had bought that pendant from a street vendor in Chinatown with the last $40 in his pocket because Naomi once told him dragons symbolized protection in Korean folklore. He remembered fastening it around her neck while snow fell outside their apartment window. Naomi had laughed softly and called it the most beautiful gift she had ever received even though the silver was cheap and slightly scratched. Now the pendant rested against Lily's chest. Adrian took one slow step forward before he could stop himself. Naomi noticed immediately. Her posture stiffened almost invisibly. Not fear. Not weakness. Protection. Where did she get that necklace? Adrian asked quietly. His voice sounded unfamiliar even to himself. Naomi looked toward the pendant briefly before meeting his eyes for the first time in several minutes. It belonged to someone who left, she answered calmly. Adrian lowered his gaze instantly because the truth inside her words struck with surgical precision. Lily looked between them curiously, sensing tension without understanding it. Mama says it reminds us that people can disappear and still leave pieces of themselves behind, she said innocently. Adrian closed his eyes for one brief second as the weight of everything he abandoned finally began settling around him like rainwater filling a room. Adrian opened his eyes slowly, but the world around him no longer felt stable. The marble floors, the crystal lights, the glass displays overflowing with diamonds worth millions of dollars suddenly seemed insignificant beside a little silver dragon pendant hanging from an 8-year-old girl's neck. For years he had convinced himself that leaving Naomi had been an act of protection. He had buried that belief beneath business deals, luxury penthouses, and the cold routines of power because the alternative was unbearable. The alternative meant admitting he had not protected Naomi at all. He had abandoned her. Naomi gently zipped Lily's raincoat halfway higher before crouching slightly to wipe a small soup stain from her daughter's fingers using a napkin from her purse. The tenderness of the gesture nearly broke something inside Adrian because he realized Naomi had carried every burden alone while he spent 8 years becoming a man the world feared. "Did you finish your science project?" Naomi asked softly. Lily nodded proudly. "Miss Harper said my volcano was the best one." Naomi smiled. "That is because you worked hard on it." Lily brightened under the praise, and Adrian found himself staring at them with an ache so deep it almost frightened him. He had missed first words. Birthdays. School projects. Bedtime stories. Entire years of tiny moments no amount of money could ever buy back. Marcus quietly excused himself to speak with another employee near the entrance, sensing emotions far beyond his understanding moving silently through the showroom. Adrian barely noticed. He could only hear Lily's small voice and the rain against the windows. "Mama says hard work matters more than luck," Lily continued while carefully eating soup with a plastic spoon. "Because luck leaves people sometimes." Naomi froze for the smallest fraction of a second. Adrian caught it immediately. So did the guilt spreading heavily through his chest. Lily was learning lessons no child should have to learn so early. Lessons shaped by absence. By struggle. By promises that disappeared. Adrian stepped forward again before thinking. "Lily," he said quietly. The child looked up at him with cautious curiosity. Up close, the resemblance became almost unbearable. Those eyes were his mother's eyes. The same dark warmth. The same thoughtful stillness before speaking. "That necklace," Adrian said carefully. "Do you wear it every day?" Lily touched the silver dragon instinctively. "Always." Her voice softened proudly. "Mama says it belonged to someone important once." Adrian swallowed hard enough to hurt. Naomi slowly stood upright then, placing herself gently but unmistakably between Adrian and Lily. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Just instinctively protective. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of 8 years spent guarding her child alone. Adrian noticed it immediately. And somehow, that hurt more than anger ever could. "We should go soon," Naomi said calmly to Lily. "The trains get crowded after 8. Trains." Again that word cut through Adrian's polished world like glass. He imagined Naomi standing in crowded subway stations after long work shifts, holding Lily's hand while rainwater dripped from old station ceilings. Meanwhile his own life moved through private elevators, black SUVs, and guarded penthouses high above the city. Lily looked toward Adrian one more time. "You look familiar," she said suddenly. Adrian's pulse stopped cold. Naomi's expression tightened almost invisibly. "Lily," she said softly. But the little girl tilted her head while studying Adrian carefully. "I think I dreamed about you before." The room went silent except for the rain. Adrian stared at her completely frozen because children sometimes recognized truths adults spent years trying to bury. Lily smiled shyly, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded drawing. Covered in crayon colors. "Mama says dreams are just memories our hearts forgot how to explain." Adrian looked down at the drawing in her hands and felt the last stable piece of himself begin to crack. Lily unfolded the drawing carefully with small fingers stained faintly blue from crayon wax, completely unaware that the man standing before her felt as though his entire life had narrowed into the space between one breath and the next. The paper was creased from being folded inside her backpack all day, but Adrian could still see the picture clearly the moment she held it up beneath the chandelier light. A tall man stood beside a woman holding hands with a little girl between them. Above their heads, Lily had drawn a silver dragon floating across a dark blue sky filled with stars. Adrian stared at the drawing so intensely that the room around him seemed to blur. "That is my favorite one," Lily said proudly. "I made it at school." Naomi's face lost some of its calm then. "Not dramatically." Just enough for Adrian to notice the flicker of emotion she could not completely hide. "Lily," she said gently, "we should not bother people." "I am not bothering him," Lily answered innocently. "He looks lonely." The words landed softly, but Adrian felt them deeper than threats he had heard from powerful men across polished boardroom tables. Lonely. No one had called him that before. Dangerous. Ruthless. Untouchable. Yes. But not lonely. Yet standing there now beneath diamond lights while rain crawled down the windows behind him, Adrian realized loneliness had shaped nearly every room he had walked through for years. He looked down at the drawing again. The man in the picture wore a black coat. The little girl had even added a tiny silver dragon around his neck to match hers. "Who is he?" Adrian asked quietly before he could stop himself. Lily smiled shyly. "That is the man from my dreams." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Adrian felt his pulse thunder painfully inside his chest. "Dreams?" he repeated. Lily nodded. "Sometimes I dream about a man standing in the rain outside our apartment building. Mama says dreams are just stories our hearts tell us because they miss something." Naomi finally stepped forward and gently lowered the drawing back toward Lily's chest. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "that is enough." But Lily looked confused. "Why?" Naomi hesitated for one dangerous second too long. Adrian saw it immediately. So did the truth beginning to rise between them all like water breaking through cracked stone. Lily turned back toward Adrian again. "You have the same eyes as the man in my drawing," she whispered. Silence swallowed the showroom whole. Even the distant piano music suddenly felt too quiet. Adrian could hear the faint ticking of his own watch beneath his cuff. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her purse. "Lily," she said more firmly this time. But the child was still studying Adrian with innocent curiosity untouched by adult fear or complicated histories. "And your necklace dragon looks like mine," she continued softly. "Maybe that is why you seemed familiar." Adrian slowly crouched down until he was closer to her eye level. The movement startled even his own security team because men like Adrian Kong did not lower themselves for anyone. Yet at that moment he would have knelt on broken glass just to understand the child standing before him. "Lily," he asked quietly, his voice rougher than before, "has your mother ever told you about your father?" Naomi inhaled sharply. The smallest sound. Barely noticeable. But Adrian heard it because once upon a time he had memorized every breath she took. Lily looked toward Naomi first, seeking permission. Naomi stood perfectly still beneath the crystal lights, carrying years of exhaustion behind calm eyes that suddenly looked far too tired. Then Lily answered softly, "Mama says my father loved us once." Adrian felt something inside him finally break completely because Naomi could have filled that child with bitterness, but instead she had protected even the memory of the man who abandoned them. Adrian remained crouched beside Lily, unable to move after hearing those words. "Mama says my father loved us once." The sentence echoed through him with devastating softness because it carried no hatred, no accusation, only the quiet belief of a child trusting the version of a man she had never truly known. Rain continued sliding down the towering windows of Loran and Vale while Manhattan glittered below like another universe entirely. Somewhere near the entrance, one of the employees lowered the volume of the piano music, perhaps sensing that something sacred and painful was unfolding beneath the chandeliers. Naomi finally stepped forward and gently placed her hand on Lily's shoulder. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "finish your soup while I speak with Mr. Hale for a moment." Lily nodded obediently and returned to the velvet chair beside the window, folding her drawing carefully before slipping it back into her backpack. Adrian watched her every movement as though his soul had attached itself to the child without permission. Naomi waited until Lily was distracted with her soup before turning toward Adrian fully. For the first time that night, they stood face to face without anyone else speaking between them. The years settled heavily into the silence. Adrian rose slowly to his feet, but somehow he no longer looked intimidating beneath the showroom lights. "Just tired." "Naomi," he said quietly. Hearing her name and his voice again after 8 years made something flicker across her expression, though she controlled it almost instantly. "Do not," she interrupted softly. "Not angry. Not loud." Somehow that made it worse. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly. "You should have told me." Naomi gave a faint, almost disbelieving laugh under her breath. "Told you," she repeated. "You vanished, Adrian." Every word landed with elegant precision. No shouting. No tears. Just truth sharpened by exhaustion. "Your phone stopped working. Your apartment was empty. I spent weeks trying to find you." Adrian closed his eyes for one brief second because every memory he buried now returned with brutal clarity. The desperate final days before he disappeared. The threads surrounding his rising criminal network. The older men who warned him Naomi would become a weakness others could exploit. He had convinced himself leaving was survival. Necessary. Permanent distance had seemed safer than pulling her deeper into his world. But standing here now, looking at the daughter he never knew existed, Adrian realized fear had made him selfish long before it made him powerful. "I thought they would come after you," he admitted quietly. Naomi studied him silently. "And did they?" Adrian could not answer. Because no enemy had harmed Naomi the way his absence had. Naomi folded her arms gently across herself, not defensive, simply tired. "You know what the worst part was?" she asked softly. "It was not raising Lily alone. It was having to explain to a little girl why the father she dreamed about never came home." Adrian felt the words physically. Like pressure crushing slowly against his ribs. Across the room, Lily hummed quietly to herself while eating soup beside the rain-streaked windows, completely unaware that her entire life had just shattered the carefully controlled world of one of the most powerful men in New York. Adrian looked toward her with helpless disbelief. "She really is mine," he whispered. Naomi's eyes softened for the smallest moment. "Not with forgiveness. With grief." "You knew the second you saw her," she said quietly. Adrian did not deny it because from the moment Lily looked at him with those familiar eyes, something ancient inside him recognized her instantly. Naomi glanced toward the engagement ring still resting beneath the glass display nearby. The enormous diamond reflected cold white light across the showroom. "You should go back to your fiancé," she said softly. Adrian looked at the ring as though seeing it for the first time. Then he looked back at Naomi and finally spoke the truth he had spent years avoiding. "I never stopped loving you." The confession settled into the showroom with devastating quiet. "I never stopped loving you." Adrian's voice had barely risen above a whisper, yet Naomi looked at him as though the words weighed more than everything else in the room combined. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Manhattan while rain blurred the city lights into rivers of gold and silver beyond the glass. For several seconds, Naomi said nothing at all. She simply studied the man standing in front of her, searching his face with the exhausted calm of someone who had spent years teaching herself not to hope for impossible things anymore. Adrian could command loyalty from men who feared him. He could move millions of dollars with a single phone call. Entire rooms changed when he entered them. Yet standing before Naomi now, he looked like a man stripped of every shield he had ever built around himself. "Love is not the hard part," Naomi finally said softly. "Staying is." Adrian lowered his eyes because no accusation could have cut deeper than the truth inside her voice. Lily glanced up from her soup quietly, sensing emotion she could not fully understand. "Mama?" she asked gently. Naomi immediately softened and walked toward her daughter, kneeling beside the velvet chair to zip Lily's backpack closed. Adrian watched the movement with painful longing. Naomi had become a mother while he became a stranger. "Are we leaving?" Lily asked. Naomi brushed a curl away from her daughter's forehead. "Soon, sweetheart." Lily looked between them again carefully. Children understood more than adults liked to believe. "Did you two know each other before?" she asked innocently. The question filled the showroom with another dangerous silence. Adrian felt his pulse pounding hard enough to hurt. Naomi hesitated only briefly before answering. A long time ago. Lily nodded slowly as though piecing together a puzzle only she could see clearly. That is why he looks at us like he remembers something sad, she whispered. Adrian turned away toward the rain-covered windows because the child's honesty was unbearable. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Expensive suit. Silver watch. Controlled expression. A powerful man admired by newspapers and feared by rivals. Yet for the first time in years, he saw the truth beneath all of it. He looked tired. Empty. Like someone who had spent too long building walls around a life that no longer felt human. Behind him, Naomi rose slowly to her feet. Lily, she said gently, wait by the front desk for me, okay? Lily nodded obediently and carried her backpack toward Marcus near the entrance, leaving Adrian and Naomi alone beneath the crystal lights once more. The second Lily disappeared far enough away, Naomi's composure cracked just slightly for the first time all night. Do you know what it was like? She asked quietly. Adrian turned back toward her immediately. Naomi, no, she interrupted softly. You do not get to interrupt this part. Her voice never rose. That made it even more devastating. Every birthday she asked about you. Every school event she looked for someone who never arrived. I had to invent stories about a man who vanished because I could not bear letting her believe she was abandoned. Adrian felt shame crawl through him like ice water. Naomi looked down briefly before continuing. Some nights she would fall asleep holding that necklace because she thought maybe if she dreamed hard enough, her father would come home. Adrian's breathing became uneven. The image alone nearly destroyed him. Naomi finally looked directly into his eyes again. And now suddenly you are standing here buying another woman a diamond ring. Adrian glanced instinctively toward the ring resting beneath the showroom lights. The 12-carat stone no longer looked beautiful. It looked obscene. Hollow. Meaningless beside the family he never knew he had lost. Slowly, Adrian reached toward the glass display case, picked up the ring box, and closed it firmly in his hand. Then he looked back at Naomi with quiet certainty for the first time all evening. I am not marrying Isabella, he said. Naomi stared at Adrian for a long moment after he spoke, but instead of relief, something sadder passed quietly across her face. You think that changes anything? She asked softly. Adrian tightened his grip around the velvet ring box until the edges pressed sharply into his palm. 8 years ago he would have answered with confidence, believing money, power, or determination could solve any problem placed in front of him. But standing inside the glowing showroom now, looking at the woman he loved and the daughter he had unknowingly abandoned, he finally understood there were wounds too deep for promises alone. No, he admitted quietly. I know it does not. Naomi looked down briefly, almost exhausted by the honesty because it arrived too late to feel comforting. Across the showroom, Lily sat beside Marcus at the front desk coloring tiny stars around the edges of her drawing while rain continued streaking softly down the windows behind her. The child hummed under her breath, completely unaware that the foundation of her world had shifted forever in the last 20 minutes. Adrian watched her with an ache so profound it nearly hollowed him out completely. She deserves better than this, Naomi said softly. Adrian looked back toward her immediately. I know. No, Naomi corrected gently. You know now. There is a difference. The truth in her voice left him defenseless. For years Adrian had survived by controlling every room he entered. Every negotiation. Every risk. But nothing in his life had prepared him for standing in front of Naomi Carter while she quietly dismantled the man he had become without ever raising her voice. Do you know what she tells people at school? Naomi continued softly. When other children ask about her father. Adrian could not speak. Naomi folded her arms lightly against herself as though holding together years of exhaustion. She says he got lost. Adrian closed his eyes because somehow that hurt more than hatred would have. Lost. Not cruel. Not uncaring. Just lost. As though somewhere in Lily's heart, there was still space for him to find his way home. The private lounge door opened quietly behind them then. Isabella stepped back into the showroom with composed elegance, but the moment she looked at Adrian's face, something inside her visibly settled into painful understanding. She glanced toward Naomi. Then Lily. Then the unopened ring box still in Adrian's hand. Isabella was many things, but she was not blind. I see, she said quietly. Adrian turned toward her slowly. Isabella, she raised one hand gently, stopping him. Do not insult me by lying now. Her voice remained calm, though sadness shimmered quietly beneath it. Adrian lowered his gaze briefly. I am sorry. Isabella gave a faint smile that never reached her eyes. That little girl looks at you the way children look at people they belong to. Silence followed her words. Even Naomi seemed momentarily caught off guard by the kindness inside them. Isabella exhaled slowly before removing the engagement ring brochure from her purse and placing it carefully onto the glass display counter beside Adrian. You were trying very hard to become someone else, she said softly. But some people never really leave your heart, do they? Adrian could not answer because every word she spoke was true. Isabella glanced once more toward Lily, who was now proudly showing Marcus her drawing near the front desk. Then Isabella looked back at Naomi. For what it is worth, she said gently, I hope he spends the rest of his life trying to deserve both of you. Naomi looked genuinely surprised by the grace in her voice. Isabella gave one final nod before walking toward the exit alone beneath the crystal chandeliers. One of Adrian's security men moved automatically to follow her, but Adrian quietly stopped him with a single glance. He watched Isabella disappear into the rain-soaked Manhattan night carrying her dignity with her, and for the first time in years, Adrian Kong realized power meant absolutely nothing when the people you loved no longer trusted you enough to stay. For several moments after Isabella left, no one inside the showroom spoke. The rain outside had softened into a quiet shimmer against the glass, and Manhattan's lights glowed like distant stars beneath the storm clouds. Adrian stood motionless beside the diamond counter with the unopened ring box still in his hand, watching the door Isabella disappeared through as though he understood something important too late once again. Naomi looked toward him carefully. She handled that with more grace than either of us deserved, she said softly. Adrian nodded once. I know. The words sounded heavy coming from him now. Honest. Tired. Across the showroom, Lily skipped back toward them holding her drawing proudly against her chest. Miss Isabella was pretty, she whispered to Naomi. But she looked sad. Naomi crouched slightly to zip Lily's backpack completely closed. Sometimes grown-ups carry sadness quietly, she answered gently. Lily considered that seriously before nodding. Like him? She asked, glancing toward Adrian again. Adrian almost smiled despite the ache crushing his chest because children notice truths adults spent entire lives trying to hide. Naomi stood again and looked toward the massive windows overlooking the city. We really should go, she said softly. Adrian felt panic rise instantly beneath his calm expression. The idea of them walking back into the rain and disappearing from his life again felt unbearable now that he finally understood what he had lost. Please, he said quietly. Naomi turned toward him. Please what? Adrian struggled for the right words because men like him were not taught how to ask for second chances. Let me help, he said finally. Naomi's eyes softened with something close to pity. Adrian, you cannot repair 8 years overnight. I know. Do you? She asked gently. Because Lily is not a business problem you can solve with money. Adrian lowered his gaze immediately because once again she had struck directly into the truth. For years every obstacle in his world had been handled through influence, power, or control. But fatherhood stood in front of him now as something painfully human and terrifyingly fragile. I do not expect forgiveness, he admitted quietly. His voice failed him briefly. Adrian Kong, feared by men across entire cities, could not finish a sentence beneath chandelier lights because a little girl with a dragon necklace had undone him completely. Naomi watched him carefully then. really watched him. Not the expensive suit. Not the security team waiting silently nearby. Just the exhausted man beneath all of it. She likes astronomy, Naomi said suddenly. Adrian blinked slightly, caught off guard. What? Lily, Naomi said softly. She loves stars. Every Friday night we climb the fire escape outside our apartment building with hot chocolate and look through a cheap telescope someone donated to her school. Adrian listened as though every word mattered more than oxygen. Naomi continued quietly, she reads at a 5th grade level. She hates mushrooms. She cries whenever animals get hurt in movies. And every single night before bed, she asks if somewhere out there her father is looking at the same moon she is. Adrian felt his throat tighten painfully. Naomi was giving him pieces of his daughter's life, one fragile truth at a time, and somehow that trust felt more valuable than anything he had ever owned. Why are you telling me this? He asked softly. Naomi looked toward Lily, who was now pressing her small hand against the rain-covered window while watching yellow taxi lights move below the building like glowing rivers. Because despite everything, Naomi whispered, she deserves the chance to know where she came from. Adrian stared at Naomi with disbelief and gratitude colliding painfully inside him. After all the loneliness he had caused, after every silent year she survived alone, Naomi was still protecting Lily from bitterness. Still choosing kindness over revenge. Adrian slowly set the velvet ring box back onto the glass counter beneath the diamond lights and realized that for the first time in nearly a decade, he no longer cared about the empire waiting outside those doors. The only thing that mattered now was whether a little girl with his eyes might someday learn to trust him enough to call him home. 3 months later, the first snow of winter drifted quietly across Queens while Adrian Kong stood on the roof of a modest apartment building holding 2 cups of hot chocolate in gloved hands. The city stretched endlessly around him beneath a pale silver sky, glowing softly in the distance like a living ocean of light. Somewhere far below, car horns echoed through wet streets and steam curled from subway grates into the cold evening air. But none of that mattered to Adrian anymore. Because beside him, wrapped in an oversized scarf and pink winter boots, Lily Carter was adjusting the cheap telescope she loved more carefully than most people handled diamonds. Do not breathe on the lens, she warned seriously. Adrian nodded immediately. Understood. Lily narrowed her eyes playfully. You did it last time. For the first time in years, Adrian laughed without forcing it. A real laugh. Quiet and warm against the winter air. Naomi watched them from the fire escape stairs with folded arms and a cup of tea warming her hands. She had not fully forgiven Adrian. Some wounds did not disappear simply because apologies arrived. Trust returned. Slowly, carefully, like sunlight after a storm. But over the past 3 months, Adrian had shown up every single week exactly when he promised he would. No bodyguards. No expensive gifts. No attempts to buy affection. Just patience. Presence. Small moments. He helped Lily with science homework at the kitchen table while Naomi cooked dinner in their tiny apartment. He learned which subway stop she hated because it smelled like rainwater and old pretzels. He listened to her explain constellations with complete seriousness while she pointed toward stars barely visible above Manhattan's glow. And every Friday night, he climbed 6 flights of narrow stairs carrying hot chocolate because once Naomi told him Lily loved looking at the moon with someone beside her. I found Orion, Lily announced proudly while peering into the telescope. Adrian leaned closer carefully. Show me. Lily shifted aside and pointed upward. Right there. The 3 stars in the middle are his belt. Adrian looked through the scratched telescope lens, but instead of stars, he found himself overwhelmed by something far rarer. Peace. Not the cold silence of penthouses or luxury offices. Real peace. The kind built slowly through forgiveness, honesty, and being allowed back into the lives of people you never deserved to lose. Naomi stepped beside him quietly. Snowflakes rested gently against her dark curls before melting away. Adrian glanced toward her. Thank you, he said softly. Naomi looked out across the city for a long moment before answering. Lily deserved the chance to know her father. Adrian swallowed carefully. And you? Naomi finally looked at him then. The old pain had not vanished from her eyes completely, but something softer lived there now too. Something cautious. Healing. I am still deciding, she admitted quietly. Adrian nodded because he understood now that love was not proven through grand speeches or expensive promises. Love was staying. Staying through ordinary nights, crowded trains, hard conversations, and unfinished healing. Lily suddenly grabbed Adrian's sleeve excitedly. Look, she whispered, pointing toward the sky. The clouds moved. Above them, the moon finally emerged from behind the storm clouds, bright and steady over New York City. Adrian looked at it beside his daughter while Naomi stood near enough for warmth to pass gently between them in the cold winter air, and for the first time in nearly a decade, he no longer felt lost. Sometimes the greatest punishment is not losing power or money. It is realizing too late that the people who mattered most learned how to survive without you. But sometimes, if grace is kind enough, life offers one final chance to become the person you should have been all along. And if this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories that remind us that real love is not measured by wealth or power, but by who stays when everything else falls apart.